I can hear her.
She's not being...
I'm gonna go home.
You're not gonna let us leave here.
We are talking the low-budget indie horror movie Clinton Road, and this one is directed by Steve Stanulis and Richard Grieco. Yes, that Richard Grieco. Both of these guys have a small cameo at the end of the movie, and there's a couple of recognisable names here. You've got Ice-T, Eric Roberts, and a couple of other kind of sort of character actors that you may recognise, plus one of these guys who was in one of these American kind of reality shows. Being from the UK, I've not heard of it, or him. And this is based on a real stretch of road in the States, which apparently has many hauntings and stuff. So yeah, so let's talk about the plot here. So 6 friends, or more, 5 friends and 1 clairvoyant, go to this Clinton Road where one of their kind of like friends has disappeared. Actually, the sister of one of these guys has actually gone missing. So they want to go to this road, try and find out what's happened to her, and you know, that's kind of the plot. That's what we get there. So when they get to this road, the 6 of them kind of end up getting in trouble. More kind of things, you know, spooky stuff happens, and you have to watch the movie to find out. So let's talk about what works first of all. I think special shout out to me for one of the actresses here. I think Katie Morrison, her name is. She plays Isabella. Was by far and away the best actor in this movie. I thought she actually did, you know, her role and her acting, I think, was very, very good. And I thought she actually did a pretty good performance, which is kind of buried in this kind of like low budget kind of horror film. But I thought she did a good performance. The second thing I want to talk about is what I kind of liked is the fact that this is based on a kind of a real, apparently kind of famous road. I mean, I've never heard of it being from the UK. But there has actually been another movie made from before, as far as I can tell. It's the only one. So I'm surprised more stuff hasn't been kind of made on this particular road. So it was interesting because this is kind of steeped in kind of like a real legend and mythology, which I found quite interesting. Apparently there's all sorts of stuff that goes on in this road, so quite a lot you can do with it. And I've got to talk about the beginning of the movie that has this kind of this strange prologue before we get to the bulk of our story. And this is where you'll get the majority of our kind of like recognisable faces, including the Ice-T, Eric Roberts, etc. They have this kind of like nightclub scene where all of these kind of people were clearly available for this one particular day, and you know, they kind of shot this kind of this introduction to the characters with all these kind of like somewhat kind of like recognisable faces, but they play it like it's something out of Goodfellas. There's all these kind of like Goomba types there, if you know what I mean, and there's all this kind of like posturing and all this. So it's weird because it's such a kind of like different type of movie compared to the rest of it. It feels so out of place, but it's kind of fun at the same sort of time. And I've got to say, I think some of the kind of the location shooting here is pretty good. The film is quite dark in places, but I do actually think it works for this film. Now, this is going to be taking place in the night in the woods. So, yeah, I mean, although it's sometimes difficult to see, and I do complain about stuff like that, but you can kind of sometimes write your way out of it. But in this instance, you really can't, and the darkness, I feel, does kind of help in this film. Some of there are scenes that are sort of good, you know, good lighting, but yeah. So I think sometimes it kind of works in regards to that, and also I kind of like the music. Okay, so they might sound relatively kind of like minor points that are positive, because unfortunately this movie has some fairly major negative points. So let's start at the beginning of the movie again. So we have this kind of scene in this nightclub that feels so disjointed that it just feels like it was added on in reshoots purely because they managed to get hold of a couple of kind of famous people. But the other thing is as well that this movie does with that, it introduces to our kind of 6 characters, our 6 kind of main characters, and they all come across as really unlikable people. So we really don't build any empathy with our characters. We really don't care about them. They just seem like very, very self-centered types. Okay, so then we kind of go into our main story. And it's just very kind of generic at this point on it. It's just these 6 people, all of whom almost immediately manage to go split off into pairs, and then they're off on their own, constantly kind of bickering through the whole time with kind of like, you know, standard reasons. Oh, I've left my phone in the car, I've got to go back and get it, to kind of like cause drama between them and arguing and stuff like that. Very kind of like a manufactured feeling drama. Some of the acting, with the exception of the one person that I've mentioned, I've got to say is rather ropey here. From our kind of other 5 kind of main sort of characters. Yeah, it's not brilliant. I got to be honest with you. The acting here is kind of poor. I gotta say, when we see our ghostly effects, I mean, it's just weird what they've done with them. You've got this kind of like this small little girl who, in some shots, looks okay, but they've just made like motion, like blur effects to make her look. I mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose. But the ghostly effects don't look particularly kind of scary, and you just have this like little girl wandering around with a kind of little of like motion blur behind her, and that is what's causing people to kind of like lose their minds. And we've also got this other guy who looks like he's meant to be some type of slasher, but he looks like some like steampunk fanboy, I've got to say. And again, I mean, he doesn't say anything, but just the physical overacting with this person is terrible. There is a little bit of gore here, but don't expect sort of too much. But this movie is not scary in the slightest. It's not even really kind of creepy. There's nothing. It's just, unfortunately, the filmmakers here haven't built any kind of tension. You've got kind of unlikable characters. The storyline is kind of fairly generic, and I feel the premise of this kind of like this true life kind of road is kind of squandered. And it just seems like a little bit of a kind of just a very, very like cheaply shot, very quickly made, and it just becomes pretty kind of like low rent at the end of the day. And then there's not really a lot happens, to be quite honest with you, in this kind of the bulk of the story. Yeah, there's a kind of a couple of like ghostly encounters, but they're very kind of like not particularly impressive. So overall, I've got to say this one was not the best, I'm sorry to say. Despite a couple of kind of little bright sparks here and there, I didn't think this movie was particularly very interesting, well made, or well acted. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.